Hey crew. Okay, this morning we're going to finish up chapter, what are we on, chapter 5? Chapter 5, Ribsy goes to a football game. Remember, he's now snuck his way into the football game. He's gotten fed some hot dogs from some people, and now he's found his way onto the football field. So let's see what happens when he gets onto the field. Let's see, where did we... Oh, okay, here we go. Ready? So he's on the field. Game's going on. Here we go. The quarterback from Chester A. Arthur High School had the ball and was running down the field toward the end zone with the Zachary Taylor team after him. The boys and girls in the grandstand were a screaming, yelling mob. The hands on the clock on the scoreboard show that only seconds were left to play, and those seconds were passing quickly. Naturally, Ribsy wanted to chase after the fastest runner, the boy who was carrying the ball. He raced down the edge of the field, avoiding the younger boys who, to his delight, had begun to chase him. A newspaper photographer, anxious to photograph the moment that would decide the game, ran along the side of the field with the boys chasing Ribsy. To Ribsy, this was all part of the fun. "Come on, Arthur!" screamed half the mob who attended Chester A. Arthur High School. "Tackle him! Tackle him!" screamed the other half who attended the Zachary Taylor High School. This was the most fun Ribsy had enjoyed since the boys and girls had chased him around the schoolyard with a lunch bag in his mouth. He eluded the younger boys who were chasing him along the side of the field. When he was opposite the quarterback who was carrying the ball, he put on a burst of speed and darted onto the field in front of the player. Ribsy hoped he would drop the ball so he could have a turn chasing it. The Arthur High School quarterback was so busy trying to stay ahead of a player who was about to dive at his knees that he did not see the dog. Just before he would have crossed the line for a touchdown, he tripped over Ribsy, fell flat on his face, and dropped the ball, which was snatched up by a player from the Taylor High School team. Flash bulbs popped. The last second ticked off the clock on the scoreboard. The referee blew his whistle. The crowd went wild. Drums boomed. Cowbells rattled. The game was over. Thanks to Ribsy, Zachary Taylor High School had won, 13-12. To Ribsy's surprise, he found himself tackled not by a football player, but by a boy about Henry's age. The knees of his jeans were patched and his hair had not been cut for some time. "Gotcha!" said the boy, hanging on tight. It was all a game to Ribsy. "That your dog?" asked the photographer. The boy saw a chance to be important for a few minutes. "Sure," he said. "Sure, he's my dog." Ribsy stopped struggling because he needed to pant. He let his tongue hang out of his mouth while he tried to catch his breath. "What's his name?" inquired the photographer, pulling out a pencil and paper. "Junior," answered the boy promptly. It was the first name that popped into his head, and the reason it popped into his head was that Junior was his own nickname. It was a nickname he did not like one bit. "Junior," the man wrote down. "That's a funny name for a dog. He was named after my father." The boy answered quickly. "What's your name?" asked the photographer. "Joe Saylor," answered the boy, leaving off the Junior on purpose. "Address?" Joe told where he lived, a street half a mile from the stadium. By now, the Zachary Taylor High School students were swarming around Joe Saylor to pet the dog that had helped to win the game. Under the circumstances, Joe was not going to put Ribsy down, not when everyone thought it was his dog who was the hero of the game. It began to seem to Joe that Ribsy really was his dog. As for Ribsy, he was enjoying the attention he was getting, and, after all, Joe was a boy. Ribsy liked boys. Joe carried Ribsy off the field. Every time he was about to put Ribsy down, someone said, "That's the dog that saved the game." Boys were satisfied to pet Ribsy, but girls were inclined to squeal and say, "Isn't he darling?" Some of them hugged him, and one girl went so far as to kiss him. Both Joe and Ribsy were having a good time. It was not until the crowd had thinned out that Joe released Ribsy. Joe then went up into the grandstand. Not having anything better to do, Ribsy tagged along. Joe walked along between the rows of seats, looking for something, and Ribsy walked along too. Joe picked up a nickel and a penny, and several rows farther up the stadium he found a dime, someone's hot dog change that had been dropped and rolled away during the excitement of the game. Ribsy examined wads of wax paper that had been wrapped around hot dogs. It was getting dark before Joe found another nickel, and by that time the stadium was almost empty. "Only 21 cents, Joe remarked to Ribsy. "I do better at college games." When Joe left the stadium, Ribsy followed. It seemed almost like old times when he used to follow Henry. "Where are you going?" Joe asked Ribsy. Then he bent to examine the dog's collar under streetlight. There was no license tag. Joe shrugged and started toward home. One of his shoes was untied and his shoelace flopped as he walked. Ribsy did not have any place to go, so he went along too. When Joe came to an old house with a sagging porch and peeling paint, Ribsy followed him around to the back and right up the steps. Inside, someone was practicing on a piano. Plink, plunk, plunk, over and over. Joe groaned. "Mom's making Darlene practice," he muttered. Ribsy looked expectantly at the door, which he was sure would be opened for him. A boy like Joe would not leave a dog on the porch now that it was supper time. "Don't you have any place to go?" Joe asked Ribsy. Ribsy's answer to this was a short, eager bark. It turned out that Ribsy was right about Joe. The boy bent over and took off the red rhinestoned collar that old Mrs. Frawley had given him. He stuffed it into his pocket and said, "That's a sissy collar for a dog like you." Then he opened the door and said, "Come on in." Ribsy stepped onto the worn linoleum of the kitchen floor, and Joe closed the door behind him. And that's the end of the chapter. Does it sound like Joe is very rich? Does it sound like he has much money? Doesn't sound like it. From the sounds of their house, the sagging porch means their porch kind of sets like this. It needs painted. And he was looking for money in the stands and wishing that he could find more. So we'll have to see what Ribsy does now that he's found a new house to be at with Joe. Joe seems like a kind kid and kind of reminds Ribsy of Henry because he's about his age boy. We'll see what happens. The next chapter is called Chapter 6, The Famous Dog. Did you catch what happened to Ribsy at the football game? Did you catch it? Kind of like what happened in the other book when Ribsy won the pet show contest. A bunch of people wanted to take his picture. Do you remember what happened when they took his picture? Yeah, that's how the other kid, the kid who originally owned Ribsy, found out about Ribsy. So maybe Henry's going to find out where Ribsy is because of his picture being in the paper over this. I'll have to check on that next time. But for now, have a great weekend. Catch you later.